Okay, so we have an interesting in the first gospel, or the first reading of the Old Testament. A lot of people always point out it's really strange how this God of the Old Testament really is not like the God of the New. He's this ogre, and there's killing, and the passage ends, he cut off his head, the word of the Lord. So it really, though, is, well, look at the end of the passage of the New Testament. And the Herodians, he took counsel with the Pharisees took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death, the gospel of the Lord. So what we're looking at here is an example of what Jesus said is it better to bring life or to bring death? That's what we're seeing here in the conflict or the contrast between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is about death, a lot of wars, a lot of killing. Many people say David killed more people than even Hitler. And so, but how could the church honor or the Bible honor such a man? Well, first of all, the reason why there was death, there was killing, was because there was not yet an understanding of the life that would be brought by Christ, the light of the world, the life of the world, the way, the true, and the life. Tomorrow we celebrate the dignity of human life. Some of our men, Eric, one of them here, going down to Washington, D.C. in the march for the protection of the unborn. It's the protection of life. So in the Old Testament, we see what it's like without Jesus. It's death. And in the New Testament, we still seek that death. The Herodians sought to kill him, and yet Christ brings life. Despite this world that wants to continue in a culture of death. And so tomorrow, pray for the culture of life. And so Agnes, who we celebrate today, is a perfect person in between there, who ended up experiencing death because of the light and life of Christ. And this is important. So like you see here, one of our other postulants, Michael pointed out downstairs about the first reading, really matches who we have today in Agnes, because she's the lamb. David was a shepherd. He was like this younger, not like Goliath. Goliath was more like the wolf. He was the aggressive one, and David was more like the lamb. He was a shepherd. He was a lamb. And that's what we have with Agnes. We have this, and that means agnus means lamb in the Latin. And so really it all interestingly ties together. I've been talking about some of these saints in the Roman canon. That means canon, Roman Eucharistic Prayer 1, Felicity, Perpetua, Agatha, Lucy, Agnes, Cecilia, Anastasia. Of course, our Blessed Mother is mentioned before that. But I've been doing talks on these. I said I want to cover these ladies of the Roman canon. We did a Saturday talk on Lucy and Cecilia. I just filmed Living Divine Mercy for Agatha. Her feast day will be coming up on February the 5th. And today, as we said, is Agnes. So again, Felicity, Perpetua, Agatha, Lucy, Agnes, Cecilia, and Anastasia. To be a woman, to make it into the canon in the earliest centuries, you had to be somebody amazing. And Agnes lived from 291 to 304 AD. She was only 12 or 13, I think, when she was killed. Now, she's shown with a lamb, as I said. The Latin word, as I mentioned, for lamb is agnus. And it sounds like your name, Agnes, Agnes, Agnus, Agnes, Agnes. And so the name Agnes actually is derived from the Greek word agne, Hagne, meaning chaste, pure, sacred. So she understood herself as espoused to Christ. And she was one of the earliest and clearest examples of consecrated virginity in the church, if not the first. You think of the people who have followed and consecrated virginity and the importance that means to the church. She was the first. Did you know that? Agnes. And unlike many martyrs, She was condemned only because she refused sexual relations. Others are because they won't deny the faith or they won't worship a pagan god. She was solely condemned because she refused to violate her chastity. That's it. So Agnes is one of the most ancient saints of the church. We don't really think about that. Her name appears, as I mentioned, in Eucharistic Prayer 1, with 8 women, including the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it's Mary and then the 7 that I mentioned. And they were venerated in the early church. These are the women known for martyrdom and for faith. They were honored for their courage, often as a virgin and a martyr in the early Roman Empire. Agnes died under Diocletian. He's one of the worst. And this is what we read in Eucharistic Prayer 1, the communion of saints, that part of the Mass. Now, St. Ambrose, St. Jerome, St. Augustine, they all wrote about her. Pope Damasus the first composed an inscription honoring her at her tomb. So there was honoring the dead, going back to the earliest centuries. Few saints, especially so young, received such immediate and worldwide veneration. So quite amazing. Real quick about her story. Agnes, she really kind of ignored the men that were trying to courtship her, trying to be with her. And they, as some of the men submitted her name to the authorities as being Christian. It's the same story with these other ladies that we've been talking about. They condemned her. They dragged her naked through the streets to a brothel. Sounds again like Agatha and others who were sent to brothels. So anyway, God stepped in, and her hair immediately grew and covered her entire body to cover her modesty. And so it was said that all of the men who tempted to assault her, to sexually assault her, were immediately struck blind. Immediately struck blind. And so it was really, had to be at that time, a very interesting thing for these people who witnessed it. What ended up happening is when she was let out to die, she was tied to a stake. And so they put a bundle of wood at her feet, but the wood would not burn. Again, just like these other ladies that the stories I've been talking about. The flames, if they did get it to burn, I think they said later, they went away from her. They couldn't either get the fire to burn on some reports, other reports where the flames wouldn't touch her. But anyway, what usually happens in the saints is they're beheaded, like Philomena, who we have our statue out here on our grounds. They're usually beheaded. And she was ultimately killed by a sword, which was interesting because this is how Christ's manner of death was prophesied in Isaiah 53. And that's very interesting. Christ was speared, this whole, well, actually in the first reading, there's a mention about the sword, that God doesn't save by the sword. And we have to choose life or death. Again, kind of the theme of the next 2 days. And so to finish, she died at 12 years old, as I said, under Diocletian. And she's buried in the catacombs of Saint Agnes on the Via Nomentana. And so over her grave, where she was buried, is the Basilica of Saint Agnes. Now, if you've ever been to Rome, if you're going to Rome, this is one of the most beautiful and ancient churches of Rome, the Basilica of Saint Agnes. I've been there, when I walked in, was in awe. And so if you get to Rome, make sure you get to the Basilica of Saint Agnes. Amazing. She's the patron saint then of chastity, gardeners, girls, engaged couples, rape victims, and virgins. So a lot on the chastity. And then finally, the last thing, you probably never paid attention to this, but the attire of the bishops and cardinals and even the Pope has distinctive characteristics. And if you are, now this isn't a set rule in the church, but it's kind of mostly followed. Archbishops, if you're not just a bishop, but an archbishop of a province, they wear something called a pallium. It's a little cloth that comes down with two pieces around the neck and then down straight. And you'll see some bishops have these and others do not. Traditionally, this pallium is worn by archbishops. Now, every year on her feast day, today, January 21st, 2 lambs are blessed in Rome at her basilica, this beautiful basilica. So it probably already happened by now this morning. And the wool is used to make that pallia. The plural is pallium, pallia is the plural, worn by the metropolitan archbishops. And this symbolizes unity with the Pope. And they have the little crosses on them. And so anyway, it kind of really works because shepherding lambs, this is the model of the Lamb of God. And so it's very interesting. Now, it's very rare and striking that there's this connection between a virgin martyr and this bishop authority that was made so direct as it was with Saint Agnes. And so something just to keep in mind, because as we approach this whole message of the Old Testament with the New, that, oh, God went from being mean to being nice. No, that's not it. God took us from death to life. That's why the Old Testament, the wars and the killing and the death, but the New Testament is about love and life. And so today, as we get ready for tomorrow, for the protection of the unborn, for the upholding of life, let us continue to pray for our politicians, for those in authority, that especially in our church, we just talked about the bishop's authority, that they will speak out against this tragedy against human life. This is what the Bible's telling us. Left without Christ, we're nothing but mist of death and darkness. But with Christ, the light of the world, we find the way, the truth, and the life.